Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Lewiston City Council meeting and workshop. We're going to start this evening off with a workshop, and this is the first City Council meeting of 2021. So welcome, councilors, and it's been a couple of weeks. I missed you all. So this session will be conducted remotely, and council members will only participate electronically. For those viewing online, please ensure that you join this meeting using the following website address, www.lewistonmaine.gov/2021cc. If you join this meeting using any other link, you may have trouble connecting properly, and we encourage you to log out and then rejoin the meeting using the correct website. Public comment on any item appearing on the agenda may be sent to publiccomment@lewistonmaine.gov. Prior to or during the meeting, and all comments received will be forwarded to the City Council. Members of the public who are logged into the meeting online can make a comment when invited to do so by raising your hand or using the raise your hand button in the lower center of their screen. Once they are acknowledged, their microphone will be unmuted and they will be invited to make a brief comment. Speakers will also need to make sure they unmute their mics as well. Councilors are also asked to raise your hand when wanting to comment. With all that said, we're going to move right into the 6 p.m. workshop. And first item up is our police station needs assessment, and we anticipate that will take 30 to 45 minutes. So I'll turn that over to Dennis at this point.
Evening, Mayor, City Councilors. We've got a couple representatives from Artifacts engineering consulting firm to give you an updated report on a police station needs assessment study that they just completed. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen and Robert from Artifacts, and they'll lead you through the presentation on the report.
Good evening. I'm Ellen Angel with Artifacts. Still trying to get my camera to work here.
Good evening. I'm Rob Manns with Manns Woodward Architects. We're associate architect with Ellen and Artifacts.
Right.
Okay, and before you begin, so Ellen, we're having a real hard time hearing you.
Oh, that's probably because I hit the camera.
There you go.
Is that better?
It is much better. Thank you.
So what we would like to present today, we've all been given a copy, I believe, of the needs assessment study. And that basically outlines what we found in terms of the building, the existing building, but also in terms of programming for what the current needs and, you know, some understanding of future needs for the police department. And what Rob has done is put together a slide presentation for you that highlights kind of the findings, but also the process and brings in maybe a bigger picture. Rob does work all over the country and is extremely knowledgeable in public safety design. So I'm going to, at this point, really turn it over to him and let him proceed with the presentation.
Thanks, Ellen. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. I unfortunately have a super wide monitor, so sometimes that makes it difficult. Is this legible to everyone?
Looks good.
Fairly legible. And I'm not going to bother actually going file present because it ends up going on a different screen somewhere else. So if you'll see the slide deck as we go through. First, thanks for the opportunity to meet this evening. This has been a long time coming. We've worked very closely with Ellen and the remaining portions of the police department to kind of come up with some analysis and some recommendations to where we are. And I'd like to start off by kind of reviewing the process and then hopefully setting the stage by just, you know, Mach 5, 30,000 feet, high level, some of the key trends and standards associated with the design of law enforcement, and for that matter, any public safety facility. Summarize where the program and the requirements came from. Ellen's going to touch base a little bit more, again, high level, because there's a very detailed report of what some of the findings of the existing police station are. And then we'll get into some of the site investigations, review that, you know, what the total project costs come out to be when all parameters are considered equal. and then give you kind of at least where we think this project may or may not be headed, and then ultimately opening it up for questions, discussions, and conversations. And truthfully, if at any point in time you have questions, feel free to interrupt, jump in. If it's something that I'm going to cover a little bit later, I may respectfully say, hey, we're just going to park that off to the side because I have that coming up momentarily. So without further ado, just to start into the process, when we started this out, this is fundamentally broken up kind of into 5 divisions. And I know you see 6 here, but the 6th is the next step for you all. And we started out doing interviews, site investigations, which it consisted of evaluating the existing building, working with the police department and the individual stakeholder groups there to identify what their needs were, looking at the site to identify what the challenges, opportunities, and constraints may be, and then refining the project goals once we conducted those interviews in order to establish a written project program. And that should have been included within the report. I saw that that was posted on the website. And then from there, now that we have these ideas of this is what we need and this is why we need it, trying to look into current needs and as well as the future to test fit that and see, okay, well, how do we fit these puzzle pieces on this particular site? And is this a viable site or a viable opportunity for the mission at hand? With that, we looked at 3 individual opportunities. We were first tasked with looking at the renovation of Lisbon Street, which we discovered would necessitate an addition. And that then caused us to look at it through a couple of different lenses, which manifested itself in the evaluation of completely replacing the building at Lisbon Street, and then also looking at a potential alternative site. And working with Dennis and the rest of the team, we identified a potential site on Park Street. That's not to say that there's not other sites available, but the concept of a third site has some validity worth considering. From there, each of those solutions were then refined, and we come with somewhat of a final recommendation, obviously pending discussion and conversation. And from there, the city, in theory, would make a decision as to which approach to take and begin to explore those in much greater detail in the form of final design, engineering, and then ultimately bidding and construction. So we've had the opportunity to meet with various stakeholder groups to discuss and prioritize those project needs and try to clearly capture those and articulate those, which manifested itself in the form of the written program. And then we had the opportunity to reconcile that and develop it and stress test it a little bit and make sure, the sauna on the 8th floor was not really considered part of the project. We were getting down to the meats and potatoes, the requirements of what it means for a modern law enforcement agency to function successfully leading into the 21st century. And then from there, we were able to establish some of the broad goals and work those broad goals into that to ensure that whatever the decision that the city reaches will allow the police department to provide services in a viable facility for decades to come. This is what I would refer to as a generational taxpayer investment. And so it's important to make sure that the decisions that are made look well into the future and that they're not short-sighted in the sense that whatever investment we make now is going to require significant capital improvements 10, 15, or even 20 years down the line. So looking way out over the horizon, if we can climb up on the mast and see what it is that we might be dealing with, that's some of the objectives of these needs assessments. Some of the project goals that we were able to establish with Chief were, obviously to address the department and allied agency needs. And then, key understanding, especially in the fiscal uncertainty that we're facing today, is to develop a responsible solution that, where possible, would utilize the existing resources that the city has to offer, whether that be in the form of an existing facility or alternative site, ensure that the civilian and sworn personnel within department are kept as safe as reasonably possible while complying with national and local standards. And then obviously through the lens of community policing to make sure that the building itself and how it functions reinforces the positive relationship with the police department and the community. And then it ultimately improves the overall operational efficiency to make the agency itself more nimble and able to adapt as the landscape of public safety continues to change over the course of the next decades. And unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball, but we can at least know, looking through history, that things change pretty dramatically at the drop of a hat. And so to afford them that flexibility is key. Other priorities would be to maintain operations during construction. Obviously, this is an essential service for the city. And when we get into construction and we're looking between 12 to 24 months worth of duration, to ensure that the services that are provided to the city are not disrupted during that phase. And then, as always, to make sure that whatever we determine is a best value, meaning not necessarily the cheapest, which in this case we found that that might be the case, but what is going to give us the best long-term value? When we look at the total costs over 50 years, where do we feel like we're in the right direction? Some of the key concepts. Well, before I go any further, I'll grant the city council an opportunity for any questions before I move on through that as part of the process that we went through.
I'd continue on, sir.
Okay, very good. All right, so some of the key concepts that we see in the development of modern law enforcement facilities really come down to a lot of the standards and best practices that we find throughout the country. And those are community policing, which would be through the lens of, getting engaged and building trust within the community before crime actually happens. So it's kind of preventative maintenance, if you will. Obviously, we have a bunch of other things that are coming into play these days, from active shooters to domestic violence, domestic terrorism, crime labs, holding of DNA and things along those lines. The active environment of fentanyl now finding its way into our communities, and the way that that presents challenges for law enforcement, not only from a policing perspective, but also in terms of how they're managing and handling that evidence, so on and so forth. Some other key trends would obviously be gender neutrality, and through the sense of looking at the fact that we have a significantly larger rate of increase of female police officers joining the force, and how we make sure that we're designing a facility that can adapt to those types of trends. And also looking at recruitment and retention. We find that in most jurisdictions, it costs law enforcement agencies a significant amount of money to train and prepare their officers to engage in their daily duties. And the opportunity to create facilities that can participate in that recruitment and retention can pay dividends in the long run if that were to be kind of analyzed out long term. Some of the standards that we see that influence, so that these aren't just coming from the opinion of an architect, if you will, some of the standards that we see that influence these types of designs and where we are conditions of work. So the physical fitness requirements associated with performing the job duties. Some CALEA standards and IACP standards in terms of maintaining sight and sound separation between male, female, and juveniles that may or may not be temporarily detained while being questioned, or things along those lines, to make sure that the right parties are separated from one another. Processing of any types of evidence, maintaining that chain of custody, making sure it's protected from loss of damage, dealing with vandalism or from fire. And then obviously making sure that we have the opportunity to preserve that evidence, protect seized items that may need to be temporarily stored before they're released back to the rightful owner. All of those types of things are elements that influence the design of police stations. Some of the characteristics, and this is where it becomes a little bit more opinionated, that at least we as architects that focus on the design of public safety think make good police stations, are obviously the building must be secure, safe, and inviting. I like to use the analogy of a transparent fortress, meaning that it needs to be open and inviting to the community, but at the same time, it needs to afford the police officers and the mission within the security that they need in order to conduct their business successfully. Sight and sound separated obviously would be one of those things that continues to show up. Resiliency and endurance in terms of being able to withstand natural disasters, and these days even some man-made attacks are things that come into question. And making sure that we are complying with the minimal standard of care. I think it's important to take an opportunity here to note that the International Building Code establishes 4 basic structural criteria, and this is also further outlined in the report. And a police station, similar to a fire station, and a hospital are considered risk category 4 essential structures. And in the short, what that means is that these buildings need to be designed to be more resilient, to withstand wind loads, snow loads, seismic activity, and you guys are fortunately free of hurricanes, but things of those natures that come into town or may occur on that low frequency but super high risk event. And the fundamental purpose of these codes is to ensure that the police station or fire station or whatever that risk category 4 structure is standing so that it is capable of serving the community during a time of need. In essence, they're looked at as needing to be a last building standing. Some of the other overarching concepts would be looking at ballistic protection, whether that be interior to protect the occupants at the duty office from the lobby, or exterior ballistic windows. Making sure that we're considering the white powdery substances, how they may mitigate themselves throughout the mechanical systems of the building, and then obviously security, access control, security cameras. And I know that there has been a question about the upcoming images, and I want to reinforce that these images just show that this is obviously not the current case in Lewiston, Maine, but it does show that, really this is in Minneapolis. This isn't actually in Canada. And, as the stereotype says, that they're all supposed to apologize for everything. And they're very nice people, but things can tend to get rowdy anywhere in the United States. As a matter of fact, just 2 weeks ago, a police officer was specifically targeted leaving a police station just in a rural part of Western Pennsylvania. So nowhere is particularly safe, and we don't want to over dramatize the issues at hand because it's very politically charged. But the fact of the matter is law enforcement facilities, and even at this point, fire stations, are becoming higher risk of being targeted in an attack than ever before. And there are measures that can be implemented in order to mitigate those risks and protect the facilities. And some examples that we know came from your particular department, your particular building. These are some shots here of some graffiti that was sprayed on. Other than that, it didn't seem to be terribly violent as we saw in Minneapolis or Philadelphia or other major metropolitan areas. So that kind of just hopefully sets the stage for some of the thought process that we're rooted in, and that some of the objectives in determining, maybe some of the costs that are associated with projects like these, some of the programming requirements. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen to kind of also continue this Mach 5, 30,000 foot review of the existing buildings.
Okay. So the existing facility assessment, the purpose of it was obviously to evaluate it and the associated sites, and to make recommendations for potential reuse or renovation, right? So it's not an exhaustive analysis. We were, as Rob said, it's a 5,000 foot analysis. It's probably closer to a 5 foot analysis in this case, but we represent the viability of certain conditions. There were certain things we weren't able to see. We can't see inside the walls. We don't know if they are reinforced masonry or not. Buildings built in this era could be unreinforced because the code didn't require them to be reinforced. So since there are no existing drawings, no way that we could tell immediately, we had to assume that it wasn't. We also see a few signs in the foundation and the cracking that's occurring that it probably isn't reinforced, but we don't know for sure. So we're looking at it just from a general point of view of what's possible. What do we see as the viability? So we don't know what the reinforcing is in the exterior masonry walls. We see that these are load-bearing walls, and load-bearing masonry walls are typically the hardest thing to remodel, because you're dealing with a load that's being carried by a mass, and any changes to that, you have to relocate that load and find another path for it down into the ground. So, and since we suspect that the foundation, especially at the west side, is not good, which is the side that would lead itself to an addition, it's problematic. The roof framing probably does not need the current code. It's compliant under the existing building code, the international existing building code. The difficulty is that anytime you make major changes, and major changes can be defined as the quantity of area that you change or the dollar amount to your changes, then the entire building has to meet the current code. So typically roof structures of this era no longer meet the current code. That's an issue. We have interior load-bearing walls, which are, as I said, those are things that are difficult to remodel. You don't just cut a hole in a stud. It's a little bit more complicated. The mechanical and plumbing systems are really, the hot water system's in disrepair. The basement sump pump is going pretty much all the time. The sprinkler system is aging and probably needs to be completely replaced. The ventilation system is not working, it's inadequate. The thermostats and the temperature control over the building, people have, air conditioning and heating going on at the same time. The exhaust fans in the bathrooms, for the most part, don't work. And the boilers have pretty much reached the end of their expected life. So mechanical and plumbing, which represents typically about 30% of the cost of a building, is pretty much outlived its expected life. Electrical, we have fire alarms and smoke detectors that are no longer code compliant. We have some branch wiring and electrical gear that's aging and non-code compliant. We have an emergency generator that's past its useful life. And I don't know if we said it, we didn't say it on here, but part of your electrical system is actually fuse dependent. We're not even sure how available the fuses any longer are. So instead of circuit breakers, you still have fuses on a major portion of the electrical. The exterior masonry looks good, and the interior finishes, with the exception of the flooring, look good. The floor areas, obviously, some of it has been replaced, some of it hasn't been replaced. There's water damage that was suffered that caused the whole basement to be replaced. The roofing is acceptable, but again, it's probably exceeding its life expectancy, and there is no appropriate accommodations available for female officers. It was never planned to have the percentage of female officers that now exist. It wasn't really planned to have any female officers. So, and the parking is problematic in that this is a picture of the employee parking, which, as you can see, is lower than the actual floor area of the building. So it's technically not compliant in terms of ADA access. You do provide ADA accessible parking at the front of the building, on the street, but none of this is protected parking either. And we've got things like crime scene evidence vehicles and the critical incident vehicle outside in an unsecured area. And you have a secured area, but the circulation inside it is problematic. So these are code issues. The lighting, a lot of lighting, electrical code issues, the accessibility, and honestly, the stairs don't actually meet the code, strictly speaking, either. So it's a can of worms, to the point which whenever you start to renovate, you're gonna pretty quickly hit that point where you're not just going to be able to renovate what you want to renovate. You're going to have to make everything code compliant. And that's where we start to have problems.
Yeah, the analogy that I like to use is if you have a sweater and you toggle on the thread at the bottom, with as you'll see when we get to the needs assessment side and the programming, we end up having to pull the thread all the way back up to the collar of the shirt, essentially, and then resew the sweater from there. So there's some useful things about the building, which we'll get to a little bit later, but maybe not necessarily just for this function. Go ahead, Ellen. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So, I mean, the big thing is, again, female officers were never part of the original program. Now they make up a significant portion of new staff. There's no accommodations for them whatsoever. I mean, there's one toilet, locker, shower, but that's it. The storage of evidence and equipment is an ever-growing issue, and especially those very expensive vans that you just have out in the parking. That's kind of an important thing. The CMU walled corridors are too narrow for current requirements. And in fact, the situation is such that if you have two patrolmen walking opposite one another in the corridor, they have to turn sideways to kind of amble past one another. That, certainly in areas where you might be trying to escort a witness, or you have somebody that you've brought in, these are really sort of problematic things. The fitness area is underventilated. It's in the basement, and it's not a real pleasant place to, and that's a critical part of training. The security of the building is not meeting current requirements. The staff and program growth is not supported by available spaces. what's happened is you have a sort of a big box with little boxes within it that are rigidly defined by these concrete masonry walls that you can't easily move. And so people are put into spaces that were not designed for that purpose, but because that program has changed or grown, they may be in there. And so there may be rooms that are too big for what's in them. And then there are other rooms that are stuffed full of, because that's the space available. So the staffing and the programming doesn't meet that physical reality of the building. So go ahead, Rob.
Yep. So from there, while the existing facilities conditional assessment was being performed, simultaneously we had the opportunity to go through the programming efforts that I had previously talked about, which dealt with the space needs assessment and looking at the relationships of spaces, the size of spaces, who they need to be near, why they need to be there, so on and so forth. And so that programming effort manifested itself again in the form of a written space program. And the initial program actually came out to about 50,000 gross square feet. And through the process of conversation and refinement, we were able to get that down to roughly 43.5, or what reflected about a 6,500 gross square foot reduction from what the initial interpretation was. And that happened through conversations about, okay, how can we make things more efficient? Can this division and that group be in the same area? Do they not need to be? Do we need 2 conference rooms? Do we need to have 1? Can they be shared? All of those types of in more detailed nitty-gritty conversations. And so what that manifests itself in, and looking at the organization of program space, is the required program came out to be about, again, 43,500 gross square feet, represented by the bar on the left in blue. And what's interesting is the existing station supports at about 22.8, but there's also some program that the police department is including offsite, and I believe that's the investigation side of things. And so when we tally those up, they come in a hair under 33. What we've noticed through that analysis is how that program gets distributed on the new side is the vast majority of the delta between the existing and the required actually falls into the fleet services side. So the space that they have now is just so inefficiently utilized and organized that there's opportunities to improve upon that without having to significantly increase all of their departments. And you'll see that there's a modest increase across the board, but this makes a pretty good chunk of what that consists of. So, we see 26% of the program going towards fleet services. We've got some space allocated towards the allied agencies such as the FBI, MDEA, investigations, evidence, so on and so forth around the wheel, which shows how that total 43,500 square feet gets distributed. If you're wondering how each of those areas compares to what they currently have, fleet support obviously is, as Ellen pointed out, getting some of those expensive vehicles undercover onto shoreline so that they're constantly powered and ready for deployment is the vast majority of the delta in the space. We've actually been able to identify by co-locating everybody in one house. We're able to make things a little bit more efficient for investigations. Evidence, again, is one of those ongoing challenges that is going to require significantly more space than what's currently allowed. Patrol administration has a modest decrease. Operations goes a little bit down, and then some of the specialty spaces, locker rooms, fitness facilities, so on and so forth, show those increases. What is not fully included in the remaining bars are any of the offsite locations that might be housed in third-party facilities outside of the current main facility. So with that, we now have the understanding, in terms of the timeline of process, we know what we need and we know what we're dealing with. So how do we solve these problems? And that is where we start to get into some of the site investigations. And the first task site investigation was to look at Lisbon Street and go with what we all thought was the best approach, which was the preconceived notion of let's renovate, and then if we need to, we'll add on. And what is important to note is that anytime we renovate, when we determine the program of about 43,500 square feet, there's a gross up factor associated with that. And that gross up factor, which is included in that 43.5, accounts for things like corridors, stairs, the thickness of walls, so on and so forth. And that is anticipated to be able to be infused into a highly efficient solution. When we're dealing with existing facilities, let's say we have a room, particularly in load-bearing masonry, that is 400 square feet, and we have a program for a particular new room that needs to be 350 square feet. You end up dealing with inefficiencies through that because, well, we're going to take the 350 square feet and we're going to give them 400 because that's far more cost effective than tearing down all of these walls. So what we found as we went through this, keep in mind that the square footage that would be required for this particular approach would actually be greater than the 43, closer to 50,000 in order to satisfy those program requirements. And I can elaborate on that a little bit more in a moment. So what we observed is obviously some of the existing station structure and bearing walls are in acceptable condition or could probably be modernized to support systems or parts of the program. However, given the fact that they need to maintain operations during construction, a multi-phased approach would be required. We would need to swing operations from new construction back to existing construction in order to make sure that there's continuity of operations. We know that there's adequate space on site to satisfy the balance of the program needs, but that's going to create a challenge in terms of where we park and what we do there. Obviously, the community is already aware of where the police station is from an innate standpoint, and we feel like a renovation here would certainly afford a better opportunity to present the police department to the community, as opposed to right now the front entrance is kind of off the beaten path on that alley. So how to make it more of a civic structure that communicates well to the community. And we know that there's existing utilities, that we have existing site access, and it maintains about, the proposed solution would maintain about 95% of the adjacent street parking. Some of the challenges that we identified right out of the gate would be that the existing station can be renovated, but again, as I mentioned, a higher cost compared to new construction. If we think about what we're saving, it's essentially the structure of the building. If we were to build new, what we're getting credited for in the renovation is essentially the walls. The roof needs to be replaced. We're going to have to go through a lot of rigmarole to pull that up to speed. But also due to space planning inefficiencies, we're going to have to renovate more than we potentially would under new construction. So with that, we have insufficient space for secured parking on site, and land acquisition across the street would likely be required to develop some form of parking. The project durations would also be extended due to phase construction. We would look at doing phase 1 as an addition over the course of 1 year, move operations over to the new phase, and then renovate the existing building, extending the total project duration of construction to approximately 2 years. The renovation also would not yield necessarily the fullest life expectancy. I would anticipate the building, the addition would be 50 plus years. But with a renovation, you're probably looking at 25 to 30, maybe 50 on some components. It's already, 30, 40 years into its lifespan at this point. And it's got some validity to it, but maybe just not for the mission at hand here. The other challenges that we see anytime we deal with a renovation is there's a higher risk for unforeseen conditions. So when we plan for contingencies of things to go wrong, hey, this foundation is inadequate. Once we excavate, we need to reinforce this. There's a higher risk of that occurring because there's many more unknowns that can be discovered through the planning process or through construction itself. So when we looked at developing this a little further, we developed a phased approach. Phase 1 would be the existing police station, obviously would stay operational while number 2 is constructed. We'd swing back into that. Number 7 would afford the opportunity for the secure fleet services building, and we would be able to maintain a bit of public parking right here along Spruce Street. And to kind of skip ahead, you can see this yields about 50,000 square feet worth of space. And I know this is buffering over the internet, so I hope this is playing for you reasonably well. What we're looking at is the parking garage over here across Lisbon Street. The addition would be the kind of gold and brown and bluish color here. And because we're being required to secure departmental vehicles and police officer vehicles across the way, from a security standpoint, if I pause that, one of the things we would advocate for is some type of secure connection back and forth to mitigate the risk of ambush or things along those lines, and allow for rapid deployment of sensitive materials without having it go across a public right of way. So for example, if an evidence delivery vehicle were to come into the garage, there would be a means to get that back to the building. Then once that first phase were completed, we would be able to go back in and renovate. And one of the challenges that we also identified is the floor-to-floor heights within the existing building. And we would need some type of central spine that would allow the lower level or the existing building to marry up to the new height. So the existing floors are about, Ellen, if I recall, they're about 12 feet floor to floor. And in modern mechanical systems, in order to get the appropriate mechanical systems in play, we would recommend at a minimum 13 feet floor, preferably 14 feet. And so you have this differential where now we've got a 2 to 3 foot differential between new construction second floor versus existing facility second floor. So looking at the overview of what this first solution looked like, we were able to take the 43,000 square feet worth of program, utilize the existing area to accommodate about 21.4 of that, and then that left us with an addition to fill out the balance of the remaining efforts for a total project size of about 50,800 square feet, or 7,000 to 8,000 square feet larger than what the program requirements were. And that's simply because we're trying to fit certain parts and pieces in an effective manner into the existing structure. We're looking at 2 phases, about 36 months worth of construction. And obviously we're not expecting any approvals to move forward now, but for the purposes of demonstrating schedule, if the city were to approve formal design and engineering now in January of 2021, you'd be looking at 2022 construction start date, January, and then that would be phased, and by the end of 2024, you would be occupied. So it's a long-term project in this particular instance. So we looked at that and we said, is there a way to, obviously looking at the balance, we're going through a lot of renovation. What would it look like if we were to do this as new construction and reduce the amount of renovation from 50,000 back to the programmed area? How would that shake out from a cost standpoint? And what challenges would we be facing? And what we found is that, again, we would need to construct this in 2 separate phases. But in this instance, we're looking at consolidating things a little bit more effectively. Phase 1 would be new construction of all occupied areas. Phase 2 would be construction. So they would move in, the police department would move in. The existing station would be raised in its entirety and replaced with secured parking for the police department. So now we get away from the secured connection that has to cross Lisbon Street. We've been able to marry those 2 elements against one another. However, in doing so, we've not left ourselves enough room on the site for public parking and where the public could park in order to access law enforcement agencies. So the site acquisition across the street, in theory, would still be, or some alternative location for public parking would still be necessary in order to support a limited number of spaces that could engage with the police department. And so how that site plan manifests itself is we've got at-grade parking here across the street, the police department operations on this side. Once the existing police station is raised, it gets replaced with secured parking, and it affords kind of this nice sheltered environment where certain operations can take place, and the buildings are providing a shield to the police officers conducting business maybe outside of the building in that kind of interstitial space. From a perspective of what that might look like completely manifested, in this instance, we're looking at a 3-story building versus a 2-story building. And the structured parking, in order to handle the quantity of vehicles associated with department issued vehicles, as well as personal vehicles owned by sworn personnel and civilian personnel, would likely manifest itself into about a 3.5-story structured parking facility. So that kind of gives you an idea of how all that took place. The challenge that we identified here, again, the common thread is we've reached some success in the fact that we're able to reduce the project size down from 50,000 to 43,944. 44. But we're stuck in that 2 phases. And even in an economy stricken by COVID, we're still seeing escalation in material and labor markets nationally. Ellen, you might be able to chime in a little bit more down the line about what we're seeing locally. But at 4 to 5% escalation per year on a multi-million-dollar project, that's not something to turn your head at. So we said, is there a way to simplify this to make the service that can be delivered to the city more streamlined? And at that point, we started thinking a little bit outside of the box, and we challenged Chief and Dennis to say, is there another site that we might actively investigate and look at? And we landed on the Park Street site. And this was just a test fit. So we're not suggesting that the city has to do this. It's just thinking outside of the box a little bit. How can we get out of the bear of multi-phase construction? But the Park Street site has some added benefits. it would be that it is all new construction with the longest building life performance that could be anticipated. There's room on the site for all new construction to occur in a single phase and satisfy all of the program requirements. As such, that would yield the shortest construction duration. The existing station could maintain full operations during construction. And we think that just kind of getting a feel for the city and looking at the relationship of adjacent structures, it's a little bit more of a prevalent community presence within the community and might play a little bit of a larger intangible role in terms of community policing and building relationships. Beyond that, the buildings across the street create an opportunity for some plazas. We know that we've got some existing structured parking over here to the east. And we're able to maintain the vast majority of the street parking along the way and maintain access to the post office parking lot. So the other nice thing that we identified, and it's funny, we had done this solution, and I noticed as an architect that focuses not only on fire or on police but also fire, you guys had just completed a rather extensive study on your fire service. But we also realized that this creates an opportunity for almost an urban public safety campus that could potentially be integrated with the fire department, emergency operations, things along those lines. So there's some synergies at play here that are at least worthy of conversation. Some of the observed challenges compared to the other site is this is obviously a much larger site, so it would require new site work or more site work. We need some new utilities, and the existing structures that are in close proximity, such as this parking garage, we would just want to keep that in mind as we deal with separation distances in terms of trying to control perceived potential threats of attack. I don't think that there's anything here that strikes me as impossible. So that site plan manifested itself through the lens of creating the fleet maintenance with secured structured parking for law enforcement vehicles over on this side, the actual police station here, maintaining the public parking lot to the east, and for the most part, the historic structure remains where it is. How that kind of comes together as a campus, again, we've got the historic building here. We're back to a 2-story, which becomes more cost effective to build than a 3-story in terms of elevator stops, numbers of stairs, so on and so forth. And you can see that we have that connection back to the garage, which could potentially also be leveraged for fire department operations if we were to think about whatever the future may entail through that. So again, these are kind of spitballing ideas, but just to test fit the site, test fit the concept, and see what we felt made the most sense. So as we look at the review of this, we're able to get the building, again, within that targeted number of about 45,000, 44,000 square feet. One phase, construction duration would be reduced to about 18 months. And you can see that that's a pretty large delta in terms of being able to get the project completed sooner. When we look at these compared to one another, the phased renovation, obviously, again, the most square footage, phased new construction balances out. But it really comes down to total project costs and total duration. And we found that the renovation of the existing building is likely going to cost the most money as opposed to replacing it and relocating to an alternative site, whether it be Park Street or somewhere else, would probably be the most cost-effective approach, all parameters considered. I can get into the details of the budget and how they were arrived at if you'd like, but some of the fundamentals in the presentation, you'll see that I have these highlighted cells. These highlighted cells indicate increased duration, so 2.5 years again at the phased renovation, higher contingencies associated with renovation for unforeseen conditions, and then potential land acquisition associated with the project. So you'll see that, renovating the existing station has a higher project contingency, longer duration, and land acquisition costs when compared to maybe Park Street, which has a shorter duration, a lower project contingency, and no acquisition costs. So those are some of the deltas that come out. You can also notice that the renovated area, we're giving about, at this point, $75 per square foot credit towards being able to utilize the existing building, with the expectation that a good chunk of that is probably going to require a lot of work. So keep in mind, even though we're giving that $75 credit, we have more area to build now than potentially in new construction. So that's kind of where this process has led us. Again, the recommended approach, barring conversation, everything's open to discussion and conversation, which can formulate direction and change. at the surface level, this appears, whether it's Park Street or an alternative site, appears to be the most economical and logical approach for the city and for the police department. So with that, and we're right on the dot at 45 minutes, I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right, if you could pull down your screen share.
Sure.
Thank you, just so I can get everybody back.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. I mean, it's obvious when reading this report earlier, a lot of work has gone into it, so much appreciated. I'll turn it over to the counselors now for any questions or comments. Councilor Pettingill.
Thank you. And I did want to say before I start, I appreciate the Weezer reference, and that was nice. My only questions with the designs of the building, one, how adaptable are these in the future when we hit that crossroad in 30 to 50 years that we're at another point where we may have to upgrade these buildings because of whatever the changes are going to be in the future. And then in the event that we do move to a Park Street look, or in any alternative location, what are we doing with the existing building? Lewiston has a plethora of vacant buildings, and I imagine that a former police station would be one that would be very difficult to rehab and turn into anything else. So I know that's not part of your task, but I don't know if that's anything that's on the city's radar for what we're going to do in that spot.
What you could do with it, we've definitely had some conversations and thought about it. So I'll answer your first question about the future proofing of law enforcement facilities as best I can. Right now, obviously, we're in the needs assessment, test fitting, site location, like what we're doing. We haven't actually begun formal design on the building, but a common approach that we will utilize, and if this moves forward beyond this, is typically the exterior walls. So the difference now is the current station that you have is masonry walls everywhere. Just about everything is masonry, and then as Chief has adapted, he's cannibalized space to make operations work, and you see some wood partitions that have been thrown up in certain areas and some steel stud partitions that have been thrown up in order to compartmentalize as necessary. The practice that we find best to future-proof buildings as best we can is the exterior walls should typically be composite masonry, load-bearing if possible, but that's just the exterior walls. And the reason for that, it affords us the opportunity to provide ballistic resistance, some security, some hardening of the occupants of the building. But once we get inside, the idea in principle, short of evidence storage and and we don't have any holding cells in here, but short of holding cells as a practice, would be to do everything post and beam or steel columns and bar joists, so that as adaptations need to occur, you're working around point loads or columns, and you can clear out, you can relocate, you can move things around much more simply than you ever could outside of that. And the other key to it would also be to identify the areas of the program that one might anticipate growing. So for example, if a city is looking, and I looked at your guys' growth trends, you're pretty even keeled. It's not like we're looking at rapid growth or rapid decline in population. If we were to work with the city that we saw, hey, look, you're charting a vertical cliff of growth, we would say what's likely going to grow is your patrol, what's likely going to grow is your investigations and your evidence. And in anything outside of that, you might look at substations. So looking at where we can anticipate addition opportunities and planning on the site for modules to be added on if necessary is part of that. The second question that you had asked about the usefulness of the existing building, it was kind of a heartbreaker as an architect to walk through that building, because the truth be told, the building itself from a bones standpoint is in pretty good condition. It could be modernized, it could be renovated, and it could function well as a multitude of other uses. Unfortunately, the needs for law enforcement facilities are so specific that it just doesn't fit that. It's like trying to go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get mulch in a Honda Civic, right? It's not the right tool for the job. So the building itself, and that's why the first solution I don't think is necessarily the best, is we're tearing something down that actually has life in it. It could be used for an office building, it could be used for a community center, it could be used for a multitude of other things. It's not for me, and I don't think Ellen, to tell you guys what to use it for, but if you're considering alternative relocating, I wouldn't necessarily suggest abandoning it. I would try to find an alternative use for it, because I think it's got some life left in it, just not for a mission critical risk category 4 essential public safety facility.
Yeah, I would concur in that. I mean, I think, it's not a bad building. The problem is that fit. And, it's just an office building. It's not a bad building. I'm sure there is someone out there who would find this building particularly useful.
And the improvements there,
we'd say, oh, you have to tear it down,
The improvements there are not what I would say, the existing building is not necessarily what I would say your conventional police station, where you've got holding cells here and this hardened thing that can't be moved there. It's somewhat benign and generic in that it can be adaptively reused for a multitude of different things. So it's not like you're trying to take a jail and convert it into a Class A office building. There's some potential, I think, there that could be explored.
I mean, it's not going to be cheap for anybody to do it, because it does have all those mechanical and plumbing issues and electrical issues. So it's not going to be cheap no matter who takes it over. But I mean, we've seen buildings like that converted to housing. I mean, you just don't know who will find something useful. So.
Yeah, as long as they don't read your report, we might be able to get rid of it.
Well, I mean, like I said, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, those are big costs, and they do need to be redone. But
Right.
if you were going to, for example, convert it to housing, you'd be doing that anyway.
It'd all be redone anyway. Yep.
Okay.
If anything, they know what they're buying.
Any other, I'm sure most counselors were able to review this report prior to your presentation. Counselor Ray? Thank you.
I know my raised hand sometimes sneaks by. So I had two questions. The first was about, and I think this is probably more to city staff, is about acquisition. That on the Park Street proposal, do we own that ground level parking in addition to the Oak Street garage next to it?
Yes, we own that, the surface lot that he would.
Yeah.
Yes, we own that.
Surface, that's the word I was looking for. And then on Lisbon Street, I think the numbers are like 305 to 315. We own the two lots, right? And then there's a building right in the middle. Is that correct? No, not correct.
I think it is.
Sorry, I was having a problem with my mute. I would need
Okay.
to confirm that. I'm seeing Ellen, nodding her head. I have not looked into that specifically, but I would need to just confirm that those are. So Chief, did you look into that specifically?
Yeah, I don't believe we own those lots, so that's why they had that cost for the
That's the
acquisition.
500,000 is for all three lots.
Okay.
It's also for raising the structure that's there.
There's
Okay.
only one structure there, Councilor Ray, and there's two vacant lots on either side of it, of the location they were talking about.
Okay, yeah, when I tried to look at it via Google Street View and the tax records, it looked like we own those two, but maybe I have the numbers wrong. Okay. And then finally, in terms of that Oak Street garage, I know we've talked a lot about garage occupancy and use. It would be helpful as we move forward with this process and are evaluating that Park Street location to have those numbers kind of like down pat, understanding how much utilization is there. I don't think it's very much, but just having those numbers in congruence would be helpful moving forward, was my only point of feedback. And then to the chief, this parking garage that is part of the proposal, is that for the current fleet or expanded, and how expanded is that?
It would be for our current fleet. They talked about our evidence van that sits outside, and a lot of this stuff needs to be plugged in constantly, especially with the cold weather. They have generators on board. We have equipment that's not supposed to get cold because you have masts that will freeze, filters that will freeze. So we're running extension cords out of buildings right now. So the idea is to try to get them undercover to keep them safe from the elements. So it's not saying we're increasing all types of parking. Right now, we don't have covered parking for any of our specialty vehicles, or when there's a snowstorm, my detectives, I'll say on Friday, will drive down to the street to the parking garage and leave their cars there, the police cruisers there, and then walk back to the station just to keep them off so they can plow.
I think there have been a lot of creative solutions from your department to deal with this building, and for better or for worse. So I appreciate all the information that was in here. It was a lot to consume, but super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are we as councilors asked right now to give any kind of indication on which option we'd like to go with? Is that just more just a preliminary kind of?
Yeah, this isn't even in our capital plan at this point, I don't believe. So I think this is really just kind of an update on the situation the police department building's in currently. And then, to get us starting to think about the future. Dennis, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that answer was accurate, Mayor. We're really just looking for feedback and opportunity for you to understand the results of this report. And I don't think we're at a point where we need to choose one of the options at this point. I think there's still some more discussion and work that will go on in the coming months and years.
Okay, right on. In that case, get to let it marinate a little bit and think more on that. It was a great presentation. I know it's still years away, but I know the police department's pretty eager to see this happen. So I don't really have any questions. I'm just really happy with the report. I honestly hadn't even thought of the site that was on Park Street. So to see that actually being utilized could be really cool and could really change how that area itself looks. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Rob and Ellen, a great report. We have a real problem. I think we know that we have a real problem. I think you've given us some good information here that we're going to be able to bandy about and hopefully come up with a solution. It's something that's needed. It's something that's needed in the near term, but I do believe that this is a good start to it. I commend you for your work. Excellent presentation. And Chief, we won't forget you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from councilors? All right, thank you folks very much for attending our council meeting and sharing your report with us directly.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all. If I could just say one kind word about Chief and his department, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of law enforcement agencies really around the country, and been more than hospitable, very forthcoming, honest, straightforward. The department, the city itself has just been a real pleasure to work with, and we're really looking forward to continuing this. So thanks for having us. Chief, I really appreciate all the effort that you've teamed up with us on this for.
Yeah, ditto.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Okay, the next item for workshopping is our item B, public art mural to commemorate the women's suffrage centennial. And we're looking at 10 to 15 minutes on this. And I think Dale is going to be presenting, or are you doing introductions to anyone? You're on mute.
I have a spacebar problem. There we go. I will do introductions in just 1 second.
Thank you.
There's Becky. Becky came to the city a few months ago with an exciting proposition related to women's suffrage and the Centennial. And I think she'd like to do a brief presentation. This is just an awareness to let the council know what's going on. And I think the process, and it'll unfold over the next couple months. So I'd like to turn it over to Becky, if I could.
Thank you, Dale. And I know you folks are on a time schedule, so I don't think I need as much time as you allotted me. I appreciate you inviting me tonight. And Dale put together a great piece for your packet, so I think you've probably read it, and I won't repeat it all, but I want to just quickly tell you a bit about the project and then more about the process, because I think the process is probably what you're most interested in. You know, we have an ordinance or a policy, not an ordinance, but a plan that you all supported and have started to use for public art. And ultimately there's 4 different ways public art could come to the community. And as we start to have opportunities, we will talk about the various pathways. This is a new pathway for us. We were approached by the Maine Arts Commission. I'm going to kind of go backwards in sequence. The Maine Arts Commission was awarded a grant by the New England Foundation for the Arts, which is one of 6 regional arts foundations in the country, representing obviously New England. And their acronym NEFA, they were awarded that through the New England, the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, to commemorate the 19th Amendment and the women's suffrage movement. Long story short, Maine was picked as the New England state to host one of 6 murals that will be installed for permanent view around commemorating the 19th Amendment. And the Maine Arts Commission, because of the work that you both in Lewiston and Auburn have done through our grant that we've been working on to acknowledge public art as a major contribution to a community, said, let's ask Lewiston Auburn if they'd like to be the host community. So we will be among 6 communities in the country to receive these murals. And I think that's a pretty good thing for our community. So because I kind of got associated with all this out there in the world, I got the call, and I've now actually been asked to be on the committee, which is good for the process, which I'll now describe. The process is, because the state was awarded the grant, they will handle all of the call for art and the commissioning of the piece. It's a $25,000 commission. What we need to do, and initially they were going to not have too much involvement at the city level. And I've navigated those waters to the point where when we put together some sites that we will offer them to put into the request for proposals from artists, we'll have some final say on the site, which will give us some ability to look at the piece of art being proposed. So I'd like the communities to keep control over the sites. We've been around the community. We've looked at all the blank canvases we have, and I just sat through the very interesting police department presentation. And I do know we have, some buildings that even in our public domain maybe could use some art to infuse them. And it would be great if this was a coincidental project. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But I get that it's not. But there are lots of private buildings, and we certainly can go that route to put those on the list. But I think in the sense of this being a piece that will live on in perpetuity and be very proudly associated with whichever community it lands in, it should be a public building. And so I'm not going to, you know these buildings as well as I do, so to save time, I won't share screen, but we've considered and this is basically what I'm saying tonight around the process. We want to give the committee some sites so they can put the request for proposals out to artists. The artists will then come to the community and talk about which site and do some work. So we're not making the site selections by putting the site suggestions out there. The fountain, the wall in Dufresne Park is a really blank canvas. One thing they want, if it's a historic building, they will do all the work around any kind of historic preservation issues, but they definitely want it to be a site where people can gather and congregate in front of it, so be able to get to it or park near it easily. You know, they want this to cause traffic to come to the community, people to take selfies in front of it, quite frankly, and go to all 6 sites across the country. So that canvas is a nice one. The Ash and Canals parking garage, which has the zebra on one end, there's still some space on that. These other 2 aren't city-owned, but we don't know what's happening to the former courthouse on Park Street. And then there's a building on Main Street that's a veteran center. But basically, if I'd like the council to be aware of the project, I'd like you, if you can, within a few days, because we're on a timeline, send me any ideas, or actually send them to Dale, because you communicate with him regularly, of other spaces in the community where you think is a great blank canvas for us to suggest to the artist to consider. And then that will start the process. That's really what I'm asking you tonight, is to endorse starting the process for this mural. We know it will live in Lewiston, Auburn somewhere, but for Lewiston sites to get put together so we can really present a nice slate of opportunities for artists to consider. And it will be a Maine artist. The commission will go to a Maine artist, so it corresponds to the region, and each region will have a flavor. And I want to just end before I'll take questions, I want to let you know that we do have a very interesting Lewiston person. Her name was Camille Lessard-Bissonnette, who was quite active in the women's suffrage movement, both here and in Quebec. And there's a historian, Ria Cote Robbins, who has worked a lot on her and done a lot of research and has taught about her. So we do have, we'll share all of this with the artists, and we will potentially have some strong link to our heritage. But there's also at the committee level, and Dale on the PC gave you has the committee list, some very significant conversation about this also being a very forward-looking piece about the future of our community and what we contribute to Maine and Maine's future, and how our world is reshaping in Maine because of the really welcoming community that Lewiston is. And I've made sure that's been communicated.
All right, thank you, Rebecca.
Thing to the Auburn Council last night. Is that so?
I did. I didn't go into as much detail about Camille because she's a Lewiston person, but I did the same presentation and suggested 2 or 3 sites that we'll put on the list there as well. And got the thumbs up from them to proceed.
I also just quickly wanted to chime in and make a small correction. Becky, you had mentioned the Violations Bureau of the former courthouse on Park Street as a private, but that's actually is owned by the city. That is a building. So just quick clarification for everyone's benefit.
And a private site would be fine, but I think it would just open an awful lot of concern around ownership and passing owners, when buildings are sold, and we could go in that direction, but I'm hoping that we can find a public site.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jelinas.
Thank you, Mayor. This is so exciting, Becky. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So the significant main city has not been chosen per se. Could be Lewiston, could be Auburn. Is that correct? Okay. And then beyond that, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say we presented the option as a community because it just seemed like the right thing to do.
Right. Okay, that's great. And then I guess when you talked about like us emailing Dale with other ideas regarding blank spaces, that's fine. But would you also want us to email Dale if we have particular ideas around the options that you've already presented?
Absolutely. What we want to do is give, when you work with artists, sometimes they see things that we don't, and they also can take something that we might think is perfect and say it doesn't work. I mean, this is a 2-dimensional piece. It will be, it's not a sculpture. It's going to be on a mural. So we want to give them the breadth of choices so they can actually have a few things to work with.
Okay. Thank you, Becky.
Okay, Councilor Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am so jazzed to hear about this. And since you brought up Camille Lessard-Bissonnette, I was wondering, have we installed the marker commemorating her yet? I know that was planned and there was a location, and so it might be nice to share what that location was because I don't remember, and see if we can have some parity with where the mural goes.
I can double check. I know just as I was leaving Public Works, Steve Murch was working with the plaque provider, but I'll double check. I believe it was installed late summer, early fall, but let me verify that, and I'll send a note out.
Yeah, it's somewhere in Ward 3, but I can't quite remember the address, so
yeah,
it'd be good to look in that area is all.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? All right, well, thank you, Rebecca. We truly appreciate you throwing Lewiston into the ring on this consideration at the state level, and we look forward to the results of that.
Thank you for inviting me. I'll keep Dale's terrific in terms of being part of this conversation, and we'll stay in touch and keep you informed.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any councilors need a short break? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into the 7 p.m. meeting. Just a couple of quick things. I want to re-emphasize that public comment on any item appearing on the agenda may be sent to public comment at lewistonmaine.gov. prior to adjourn this meeting, and all comments received would be forwarded to the Lewiston City Council. Also, members of the public who are logged in to the meeting online can make comments when invited to do so by using your raise the hand button in the lower center of your screen. With that said, Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll for attendance, please.
Sure. Council from Ward 1,
Present.
Ward 2,
Here.
Ward 3,
Present.
Ward 4,
Present.
Ward 5,
Present.
Ward 6,
Present.
and Ward 7.
Present.
Thank you. Also present this evening, Mr. Mayor, is the City Administrator Dennis Dote, Deputy City Administrator Dale Dowdy, Finance Director Heather Hunter, and myself as the City Clerk. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First item on the agenda is an update in reference to city actions regarding COVID-19. Dale.
Yeah, a couple things. We're continuing with split shifts at City Hall, trying to maintain our levels of service, as we've talked about the last couple times, mandating masks and have some protocols in place to manage that with both our staff and with customers. At the end of December, the Families First Coronavirus Act lapsed. There's a portion in there for paid leave that was mandated of all public and private employers. I believe it was over a certain number of employees. That lapsed. However, in the reauthorization, it was allowed to be voluntary. The city has extended that to its employees of up to 80 hours of leave should an employee have a coronavirus or quarantine, something related to COVID-19, a leave. And that is being reviewed by the department heads and then recommended to Dennis and I for that leave. The 80 hours hasn't refreshed, so if an employee has used some portion of it, they have the balance from the original to use if needed. There's a 3/4 pay provision for employees, for, again, up to 80 hours if one of their dependents also has a coronavirus quarantine issue. We seem to be we're still having a few trickle in here and there, but it is definitely settled out. And I think a lot of our hygiene and other activities have really gone a long ways to manage that in the city, especially listening to how other cities are managing. So that's going well. Another piece, which I think is kind of a neat thing, a grant that we received for education and personal protective equipment. Heather reached out again to New Manor entities and found that we're going to be able to distribute another 16,000 pieces of personal protective equipment from that grant to over 8 organizations. Once that's complete, we will have distributed almost 44,500 pieces of PPE to New Manor communities through a total of 12 different agencies. In addition to that, with Heather's work, she's distributed over 34,000 pieces of PPE to business entities within the city and over 130 care packages. So that grant has gone a long ways to really trying to manage COVID in the city, both in the New Manor community, but also in the business community, and trying to support them. So Heather's done a great job managing that. And I think Dennis and I just wanted to really highlight her work there. So that's the update for today.
Any questions, comments from the council? The program, Dale, that you were speaking of that's been extended, did you say that that the grant money expired and now the city is offering it?
The city, what expired was the requirement for the city to provide it. Unfortunately, cities have never, both public entities, both cities and counties have been excluded from any reimbursement. So a private entity gets reimbursed through tax credits. We're specifically excluded from that. We've never been able to reimburse that. What we've done is really just continue to extend our ability to have employees be out. And the reason being, again, protecting the rest of employees, really encouraging people when they're ill to stay home, to quarantine when they need to, and to quarantine as family members become ill. So the only thing that expired was the requirement that we provided. The requirement became optional to us.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of December 15th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Clement, seconded by Councilor LaJoy. And any questions or comments about the minutes? If not, Madam Clerk, you can call the roll.
Sure. Council from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Okay, thank you. We're now into public comment period. Any member of the public may make comments regarding issues pertaining to Lewiston City Government with a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone who wishes to make a public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council. Madam Clerk, roll call vote.
Sure. All roll call votes for this meeting will begin with the Councilor of Ward 3.
All right, thank you. Agenda item number 1, please.
Item number 1, public hearing on the renewal application for a special amusement permit for live entertainment for the Fraternal Order of Eagles 618 located at 1327 Sabata Street. Requested action to grant a special amusement permit for live entertainment to the Fraternal Order of Eagles 618 located at 1327 Sabata Street.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Councilor LaJoy. I think that was a second out of Councilor Jensen. Anyone, Kathy, you got anything you want to add to this?
We don't know. All the materials in your handouts, and we're happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor. We don't have any concerns.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the council? To the public? Back to the council. Call the roll, please.
Council from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
All right, thank you. Agenda item number 2, please.
Item number 2, public hearing and first passage to amend the land use code and zoning map for a conditional rezoning request from community business to highway business for the shopping plaza located at, owned by Shopping Plaza Associates LLC, located at 1035 Lisbon Street and 191 South Avenue in order to allow warehousing and self-storage. Requested action to approve first passage to amend the land use code and zoning map for a conditional rezoning request from community business to highway business for the shopping plaza owned by Shopping Plaza Associates LLC, located at 1035 Lisbon Street and 191 South Avenue to allow warehousing and self-storage, and to continue the public hearing for final passage to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councilor Clement, seconded by Councilor Jensen, and I believe Doug Green's being brought in.
We should have Doug Green and Mike Gatto in one moment.
Just waiting on Doug to get his video up and running.
Good evening.
Good evening. Do you have some video for us, Doug?
Yes, thanks. And I also see that we have Mike Gatto here from Stony Brook Land Use Inc. So in your packet, right off the bat, I wanted to clarify that both from the staff standpoint and Stony Brook Land Use, that we, there we go. Here I am. That in the process of going through the planning board recommendation process. Initially, the staff report to the planning board only listed 1035, and the application for this conditional zoning request, again, from community business to highway business, the applicant was clear in that they wanted the property at 1035 and 191 South Avenue to be conditionally rezoned. And so there was an addressing oversight initially to the planning board. And so we wanted to make sure that was clear to you that the intent of this conditional zoning request was to do the conditional zoning for both of those properties. The property 191 is the South Lisbon Post Office. So just want to start off with that clarification for your understanding of what is before you tonight. So in your packet was the application, the petition, the revised ordinance that puts into verbiage what was being requested. And the main purpose of this conditional zoning request is that, and if you are looking at the staff report, you'll see that the shopping plaza that's located at the corner of Lisbon Street and South Ave, which includes the McDonald's, the post office, and so two other commercial buildings, it's pointed out that there's a warehouse use on one of the buildings that's accessed from South Avenue, and that's the Easy Self-Storage. It's accessed from South Avenue. The front of that building was formerly a Goodwill store, and that's now vacant. And the applicant, the owner of Shopping Plaza Associates, wanted to expand the warehouse self-storage use to the front of that building where the Easy Self-Storage is operating. The existing zoning of community business does not allow warehousing and self-storage. So that's the real reason the applicant came to the staff to talk about this, and we supported this. In their application, they provided information on how this application for conditional rezoning does comply with the community's comprehensive plan. On the second page of the staff report, we provided some simple mapping that shows the future land use map recommends a intended growth sector in this area along Lisbon Street. And there's coinciding areas very similar to here that's zoned highway business. This area, while it's zoned community business, we felt it was appropriate to recommend approval of their request to highway business. The planning board voted 7-0 in support of this. And again, in the application, the applicant also provided other reasons that are in compliance with the comprehensive plan. So they submitted a petition that met all the requirements. And again, we think it's a good idea. Mr. Gatto is here to answer any questions that you might have about this request, but I'll mention also we had a few questions about from nearby residents when the letters to abutters went out. And once they understood that there would be no change to the building where the Goodwill used to be, that this is a very low impact use to have self-storage in this building. And once they understood what the request was about, the people who called were in support of this as well. They had no problem with this. No one spoke up at the public hearing at the planning board. So again, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have tonight. But again, wanted to make clear that this conditional zoning request was for two properties, not just for one property. It's for 1035 Lisbon Street and 191 South Ave. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the planning department believes that on a business strip, that warehousing and self-storage is best use, and that falls within the comprehensive plan.
Yes, in a commercial setting like this, the warehousing and self-storage is already in existence on the back side of this building. It's a low impact use, low traffic. And while the original construction and use of the property was largely for commercial purposes. Right now, there is a lot of difficulty in filling vacant retail space and office space. And that's another reasoning that the applicant provided to justify this. And the staff, again, felt this was a reasonable request and in compliance with the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jelinas.
Thank you. Thanks for that presentation, Doug. I'm just curious. I guess I thought the back of that building was like a climate controlled storage that was storing big things like vehicles and things like that, but that's not the case. So when I think about the old Goodwill space, what kind of storage are we talking about?
I would like to ask Mr. Gatto if he could answer that. He has a better understanding of how the building would function if it was approved.
Hi, good evening. The space in the basement level is caged off into self-storage units. So the downstairs of the current building is not large vehicles and things like that. It's self-storage units. So the Goodwill building upstairs will be caged off the same way. They have constructed 3 new offices in the front, in the glass area of the front of the building, which will be used by Easy Self-Storage. And the rear of that building, once you enter, will be set up so that it has self-storage areas.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, has there been any other folks approaching the planning? Have there been any other people approaching for that space, that particular old Goodwill space?
No, it's been vacant for some time.
No.
And this is a way to try to turn it back into income producing. We have a lot of need in the market because we've been doing self-storage for a lot of years, and this is a good use and a good location for it.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, so Mr. Gatto, the facade of that building, that'll remain the same?
That's the proposal at this point. Yes, it's gonna look like an office area in the front. Again, they just rehabbed it, spent some money in doing that. And then the back, once you go in the door, you'd have a corridor and you enter in the units that will be out in the back.
And will they be operating offices where somebody could walk in to try to rent? I mean,
It's my understanding that at least one of the rooms will be used by the person running the self-storage units for Easy Self-Storage.
all right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from council to the public? And back to the council, Council Ray.
So this is the lot that was it was restriped, right? And it has the bank in the corner.
There's a Camden Bank at the corner.
Okay. And so we're talking about the property. Sorry, I'm having trouble. So there's the dollar store, and then we're talking about the one that faces Lisbon Street directly, right? Okay, thank you. I'm having trouble placing myself today. And that's going to remain the same. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions or comments from council? If not, call the roll, please.
Counselor from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Gatto, for taking the time to come to the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 3, please.
Item number 3, resolve adopting the City of Lewiston Police Department Public Safety Plan 2020 through 2021. Requested action to approve the resolve adopting the City of Lewiston Police Department Public Safety Plan 2020 through 2021.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Jelinas, seconded by Councilor Jensen. And I believe Dennis, is Chief O'Malley going to be presenting?
Chief just got brought in, so I'll let him open up the item. I mean, he's here. I can do a quick intro. If there's any questions, I'm sure the chief can answer. But ultimately, as you know, on December 1st, the chief presented his the police department policing plan, for 2020 and 2021. The plan focuses on expanding projects for you, increasing foot and crime suppression patrols, and expanding the selective enforcement team. What we're looking for tonight is just for the council to adopt this plan, and we'll continue. The next report out, I would say, would be approximately a year from now. Be able to report out on the progress on some of these activities through the department's annual report, and that would be our next anticipated. That's all I have tonight.
Okay, anything you'd like to add to that, Chief?
You have the copy of the plan. I mean, I've already instituted some of that with the walking beat off Sagagnon on Lisbon Street. But no, I think we're just gonna continue with this, and I'll be sending some of those requests in the budget process.
Okay. I just have a couple of quick things. I would assume this is your department, men and women have seen this plan, and your command staff. Do you think we have buy-in from the department on this plan, and what the goals are when it comes to the tree streets and our business district?
Well, I've gone over with my command staff. It was actually the command staff talked about wanting to expand the selective enforcement team. I've got buy-in in terms of creating a new sergeant's position to oversee that, oversee the SET team. We have the walking beats. I have officers who want to take part in the community resource team, who want to be in the walking beats, but unfortunately, right now, just due to manpower issues, I'm not able to accomplish that.
That's pretty encouraging, though, that their officers actually seeking to do some of that walk and beat in the residential area.
It's right. It's not all of them, but there's officers that want to get out, and they get to have a different aspect of the police work by doing that, as opposed to just running from call to call.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, councilors? Okay, seeing none to the public. Back to the council. Call the roll, please.
Counselor from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
All right, thank you, Chief. Agenda item number 4, please.
Item number 4, order authorizing execution of a municipal quitclaim deed for real estate located at 274 Pine Street. Requested action to approve the order authorizing execution of a municipal quitclaim deed for real estate located at 274 Pine Street.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Jensen. Heather, anything you want to add to this?
Sorry, apparently everybody's having mute problems tonight. No, this is pretty standard. Once the account is paid, we release the deed back.
All right, very good, thank you. Questions or comments from the council? To the public? Back to the council. Call the roll, please.
Counselor from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
All right, thank you. Agenda item number 5, please.
Item number 5, biennial appointment of the Registrar of Voters. Requested action to appoint City Clerk Kathleen M. Montejo as the Registrar of Voters for a 2-year term of office from January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2022.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Clement. Questions or, is there anything you wanted to add, Kathy?
No, this is just a step that's required by state statute. It's a 2-year term and it must be appointed by the municipal officers at the start of every odd numbered year.
All right, thank you. Questions or comments from the council? To the public? Back to the council. Call the roll, please.
Counselor from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 6, please.
Item number 6, appointments to various city boards and committees. There are 3 items for requested action, so we'll take them individually. The first one is to receive the mayor's appointments to various city boards and committees. No city council action is required. These are appointments that the mayor can make solely by virtue of his office, and those appointments are listed in your background material. There are 7 boards. I'd be happy to read the names, Mr. Mayor, or whatever you would like.
So I do believe, yeah, well, we have public here. If you could just quickly go over that.
Sure. So there are 7 different boards. Assessment Review Board, there are 3 members, Noel Madore, Joseph McKinnon, and Gary Savard. Board of Appeals, Jeffrey Goslin. Community Development Block Grant Review Committee, Pauline Gudis, Ashley Medina, Abdikar Nigay, David Nielsen, and Paul Robinson. Complete Streets Committee, Christine Murray. Finance Committee, Robert Bisson. Historical Preservation Review Board, John Clifford and Sandy Marquis. And Planning Board, Roger Dupree, Roger Fuller, and Nathan Freed.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the council? To the public? Oh, I'll get right to you, Councilor Clement. To the public. And back to the council, Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No problem with the mute button tonight, but apparently the raising hand is giving problems. So it's bilateral. It's on both sides of the screen. Would we be privy to a rundown of the applications for these various boards and committees that were submitted to the city at some time in the future, not necessarily right now? Just so we can have some information.
Yeah, I mean, I think the new pattern since this council is asking for all these applications. I think they're all public record. Any councilor can reach out to the city clerk's office and ask her directly for that, if that works for you all. Is that correct, Kathy?
Yes, sure, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, call the roll, please. Do we have a motion already on that, Kathy?
Well, so the first matter, Mr. Mayor, is just an announcement of your appointments. There's no council action is needed. So then the next item for requested action is to approve the mayor's nominations regarding his appointments to the Housing Committee, Lewiston Auburn Water Pollution Control Authority, Library Board of Trustees, and the 911 Committee. And this does require a council vote.
Okay, yeah, I confused the to receive, thinking that would have to actually be acknowledged by him. But
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
all right, go ahead.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Jensen. And did you already announce those in the last one or not?
I didn't, would be happy to do that. So Housing Committee is Stephanie Beck Doobie, Perito Nozo, Michael Reed. The Lewiston Auburn Water Pollution Control Authority, Norm Lamey. The Library Board of Trustees, Edward Barrett, Marissa Duco, and Sarah Gillespie. And the 911 Committee is a staff appointment appointing Heather Hunter as the Finance Director to that board.
Okay. And we have a motion on the table.
We do, yes, from Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Pettengill.
Okay, any questions or comments from the council? If not, to the public.
I don't think I was the second on that one.
Oh, sorry about that. Oh, my
Okay.
apologies. Councilor Jensen. Sorry about that. Thank you.
All right, none from the public. Back to the council. Call the roll, please.
Councilor from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0. And then the last item is to review the application submitted for appointment to the Lake Auburn Watershed Commission and to nominate and appoint an applicant if interested. And there are 2 residents who applied. Their applications are in your book. Applications were submitted by Ronald Potvin and Caleb Roebuck.
Mr. Mayor,
Counselor Jensen,
I nominate Caleb Roebuck.
Second.
okay, we have a nomination / motion by Counselor Jensen and seconded by Counselor Ray. Any questions or comments from the council? To the public? Back to the council. Call the roll, please.
Counselor from Ward 3,
I had a question first.
Go ahead.
It looks like Mr. Roebuck is in attendance. Did we want to offer? I guess he could have raised his hand during the public session. Never mind. I will vote. Yes.
Counselor from Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 7.
Item number 7, reports and updates.
Counselor Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The school committee also had a similar break from meeting as the council did, but we did rejoin last night. Probably the biggest headline is that Lewiston Public Schools are all remote this week due to an increase in cases, and that will be reevaluated for next week. The superintendent made that call and announced it on Sunday. So we're hoping folks had some time to prepare for that and get through this week as best as they could. The other big ticket item, I guess I would say, call it, was talking about the use of YouTube as an educational tool in our district. There are some conflicting issues there, basically about protecting children and federal law required to do that versus what the filtering on that tool looks like. And so it sounds like we're going to do some more research, find out what other districts are doing to keep kids safe, but also make sure they have access to all the tools that the rest of the world has access to. And other than that, we did hear from athletics about coaches and the work. They're doing some really great work with following up with students, making sure they're engaged and continuing to fill those vacancies. We doubt there's going to be a winter season. It seems like the goal of the MPA, which governs athletics for the schools, is going to try to salvage as much of the spring season as possible and possibly not have a winter season. But we keep going week to week and looking at the state coding system of the green, yellow, red. And if we're at green, then winter sports could possibly have some version of the season. That's about it.
Okay, any other reports or updates? Seeing none, agenda item number 8, please.
Item number 8, any other business counselors or others may have relating to Lewiston City Government.
Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to enter into executive session to discuss labor negotiations regarding the Maine Association of Police and Patrol Unit and Lewiston Police Supervisory Command Unit.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councilor Jelinas, seconded by Councilor Khalid. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5, Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
and Ward 2.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
All right, thank you all very much and see you in the executive session.